see our website at the top of this slide, www.aaprp-intl.org. Please make sure you visit the website, and on the right-hand side, you'll click on Become a Member. After you do that, you'll be able to donate. We've talked time and time again about the important relevance of expenses that occur with African Liberation Day, because not only do we have on the ground events that require funding support, but we also have an international broadcast that takes place. Not to mention we have speaker fees, we have traveling costs. In some spaces, we even have hospitality resources in terms of food and things like that that need to be purchased. So we definitely are asking you all to support as much as you can. African Liberation Day is literally one of our largest events, I would say, besides Pan-African Women's Day, that we host and offer each and every year as annual events. So we do ask for your continued support with that as much as you can. And, just keep in mind that we're going to continue to push that we're asking for you to support, because the thing about African Liberation Day, especially as it connects to tonight's topic, is not only is it tying in how African people's struggle is connected to other colonized people's struggle and how all of us are working to get our land back, but also to support one another in getting our land back. But we also need to think about, I should say, bless you, I think. We also need to think about how African Liberation Day is all about us continuing to enforce the Pan-Africanism that is rooted in all of us. So this idea of understanding that the whole reason that the All African People's Revolutionary Party is based out of Africa is because that's where everything has started with us. That's literally where we have come to become who we are. That's where we were kidnapped. That's where the land was stolen from us. That's where all of that took place. And so we intentionally are having events that are centering around African revolution and African people achieving their revolution, by also connecting the dots with other people who are seeking to achieve the same revolution for their respected people. And so enough about ALD, but definitely please visit our website so you can support us and help raise money for those events to take place. But we also want to focus tonight on how there's this notion that we have been commodified, if you will, and value has been added to African soil in terms of what resources come from it and how we've been thinking about this. And so, if we think about the legacy that France has incorporated, as well as other parts of Europe, in terms of what the impact has been on African soil, then we know that with the help of the US, they've been very instrumental in making it so that things have been very difficult for African people. I still remember thinking about how some of our comrades were discussing how it's very difficult for them to travel from country to country because of the different taxes that they have to pay, not to mention the fact that the neocolonialists are making it so that it's very hard just to go from Senegal, for example, to a neighboring country and whatnot. And so just thinking more in depth about how this has been, for 500 plus years, a very difficult transition for us in terms of getting our land back, because the European colonizers have made it very, very, very clear that they have intentions for seeking specific resources, which is why they decided to take over that country in the first place. And we can attribute that to the Berlin Conference. And so, it's been really evident in terms of seeing how this has impacted our people as well, because there's no telling how this is going to have larger repercussions later. For right now, we just know that our folks have been struggling and working really hard to resist and to push them out, but yet they have definitely grounded themselves in our resources and in our homeland. They have grounded themselves in enforcing their language and their way of life and their clothing styles and their food. And we've had to push and resist as much as we can to keep who we are and to hold on to who we are and to fight to get our land back. And so this is why, we think about Britain and we think about the US and we think about Europe and how they're all in cahoots with one another. We think about the exploitation of resources such as diamonds or gold or even cacao, for example, and how all of those things have been to profit off of occupied Palestine and other spaces where that money is going towards building up Europe or building up the US. Meanwhile, we're not getting what we need to get, and the resources are coming from Africa. And so I think it's really important that we think more about that, because that's the true definition of exploitation. And this is exactly why it helps to at least know who you are and where you come from, but it also helps to know what resources come from where you come from. Because I think in being able to explain that to other people, not only does it show the importance of increasing your political education, but you're able to really build up an argument. If you can actually explain to other people what resources are coming from Africa, how they are being exploited, and what are some solutions to prevent that exploitation from taking place. Also, if you can tie in how the resources being exploited is connected to the exploitation of African people. I mean, at that point, the argument is over, and there's a mic drop, because no one else can refute anything you're saying, because you have evidence to back it up. You have scholars to back it up, because you've been giving different points of view from different and scholars, such as Nkrumah or Amilcar Cabral, or maybe a Sekou Touré, or whomever it is that you're choosing to cite. And so I think it's really important to think in great detail about that, because I find myself having more and more conversations. And if you're like me, then you're learning quickly. And I know my dad has said this before, there's a lot of people that don't know anything about Africa. I mean, they know absolutely nothing about Africa, but they don't know that they don't know nothing, because our society teaches us that it's attractive and it is very, very, very arousing for you to be as ignorant as you know what, but to pretend like you know everything. Like, there are so many people who are very attracted to that. And I personally, I think it's actually more attractive to have knowledge and to seek knowledge and to gain knowledge. But that's not the reality, and that's not our society. If you do seek knowledge and if you are trying to gain knowledge, then you actually get more bullied and you get more criminalized, because now you're trying to actually get information that can help you resist the oppressor. And that's a problem, of course, because we need to stay in line. And we don't need to resist. We don't need to fight back. We don't need to rock the boat. We just need to tolerate and accept and be submissive, right? That's what we've been trained to do. Otherwise, if we don't, then the risk might be death or going to jail, right? We know that. But yet at the same time, so many of our ancestors have already done those things. And some of them, unfortunately, have died for the cause, but that's precisely it. They have died for the cause because they understood that something needed to be done so that our conditions could change. You know, a lot of you know that I work at a college campus, and you know I teach classes, but I'm also working at the Center for Writing and Communication on campus. And we had a client come in last week that had the assignment where they had to write a narrative from the perspective of an African slave. And I thought it was very interesting, because the room that this client came into was predominantly European, except for myself. And so the student walked in, and I, looked at their paper, and I mean, it was a good paper, but it definitely needed some work. And so I gave some examples, and I said, well, you talk about Africa being colonized, but you don't give any examples. And the student was like, what do you mean? And I said, colonized by who? Colonized by the British, colonized by the French, colonized by the Portuguese? Like, who are you talking about? And which countries were colonized by these different people? Where did the British take over? Who was colonized by the French? Blah, 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 blah. And so just giving the student different examples, I said, also, you don't go into any detail about how treacherous and dehumanizing the experience of slavery was. You talk about how it was bad and it was horrible, but you don't talk at all about some of the actual examples that took place, about literally dividing the family out, about castrating African people in front of other African people, about removing genitalia from African people in front of people, taking out insurance policies on people, not objects like cars, but actual people, which is also coincidentally where insurance companies got their start. So I explained to the student, I said, you're going to have to give some very good examples, because this is your opportunity to inform and to teach. And if you don't do that, that's a missed opportunity where you can learn more, increasing political education, even though the student was not in an organization. That's the first step. And second of all, helping that student to understand you have a lot more responsibility on hand, because you chose to take this topic. You're going to have to do this right, because your ancestors are watching you. And I could tell that made sense to the student. So the student was like, yeah. I don't want to do wrong by the ancestors. I want to make sure that I do this right. And I'm like, so you're going to need to put a lot more work into this, because you're there to continue their story and to really help other colonizers understand this is what really happened. We know that this is what happened, and we're not going to allow you to do it anymore. That's why we've been fighting. We will continue to fight, because victory is certain, and we will get our land back. Next slide, please. And so, just continuing on this topic, I think that it's really, really critical that we continue to know who we are and we continue to express that to as many people as possible. Again, this is why we're encouraging you all to join an organization that is working for justice, because you can't do that job by yourself, and you shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to help the rest of the world understand the brutalization of colonization. You shouldn't have to do that. There are thousands of people who agree with you that colonization is a horrible, horrible system, and they are fighting with everything they have to resist it. So joining an organization empowers you mentally, physically, and spiritually, because now you're in a position to work with other like-minded people who also agree with the same values that you have. Am I saying that you will agree on every single thing? Probably not, because that's what makes us human, right? We have our own experiences that determine our outlook on life. But I also would say that even though you may not agree on every single thing, it beats not having no one else in your corner when you are advocating for these things. Like, if you know deep, 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 deep down that it's wrong to ignore people when you see them on the streets and they're begging for money, then that means you still have an ounce of humanity left in you. That's more than we can say about this capitalist system, because the same system that we live in is trying very hard to eradicate every single ounce of humanity. The minute they're able to achieve that, then you no longer have to think about other people. And if you no longer have to think about other people, then you no longer have to think about what it means to be humane. If you're not thinking anymore about what it means to be humane, then you're not thinking at all about the possibility of thinking from a collective standpoint, which can essentially lead to socialism, which can essentially lead to communism. And therefore, the capitalist system has you beat. And so we have to continue to hold on to this humanity. We definitely need to join organizations that are working for justice. And we need to be mindful about how our contributions to these organizations, it starts with this foundation of building our political education. We have to accept the fact that we don't know anything, you all. And the minute that we learn that, then we can start to actually learn some really, really critical information that's going to set the trajectory for how we live the rest of our lives. I promise you it is, because you'll find yourself in conversations where, and specifically this month, where you will be in debate with other Africans about why it shouldn't be called Black history and how it actually should be called African history. And then you're going to give examples, helping them understand that from a Pan-Africanist standpoint, it benefits all of African people for us to acknowledge everything that all Africans have done for Africans everywhere, not just to Americanly, Westernly center Africans in America, like they're the only Africans who have done anything for African people everywhere. But we also need to acknowledge that Africans everywhere have done stuff, which means we need to step outside the box and decenter US history. That's really what that means, especially because it's based on lies. But if we start to have conversations about how King and Malcolm went to Africa, not once, but multiple times, if we start to have conversations about this, if we help people understand who Amilcar Cabral is or was, if we help people understand who all these people were and how they contributed to the understandings that we have today, the whole reason that we have the passion that we have as people of the AAPRP, the whole reason that we believe that Africa will be free and that victory is certain, is because of our ancestors like Kwame Nkrumah, because of our ancestors like Amy Johnson, Marcus Garvey, because of our ancestors like Shirley Graham Du Bois. All of these people have helped us see the path of Pan-Africanism, and that it is the true one way that we can achieve one unified socialist Africa. All of those things are based on choices they all have made. And the only reason we're aware of those choices is because somebody knew to document them. And then we had the wherewithal to add that documentation to our reading list. And then we picked up that book and we began the journey of relearning who we are, because we have unlearned it after colonization. That is the true purpose of what this piece is all about. And so it's very important that we go back to understanding that, because all of what we have known has been robbed from us. It has been stolen from us, from our ideological selves, and it's up to us to regain it. It's up to us to regain it and to express it to our children and to our godchildren and to our nieces and our nephews. If we do not regain this information, our ability to achieve one unified socialist Africa will never, ever, ever happen. Because for the first time, we're going to allow the master to win officially. If we're not even willing to gain information and to grow so that we can resist, then we're going to let them win. And we can't do that. We can't do that, because then that means we're living for nothing if we can't get Africa back and if Africa can't be free. And Africa deserves to be free. Africa deserves to be free. I think Africa has been through enough. I don't think we need to put Africa through anything more. So it's up to us to have this better understanding. It's up to us to not buy into the material sellouts that so many capitalist entities are trying to do for us. You know, they'll continue to push down your throat that you need a new car. That's why they're constantly showing you new car commercials. They'll continue to push down your throat that you need a new house. They'll show you all these different apps on ways to buy houses and whatnot. And they'll remind you that your teeth are not white enough. They'll remind you that your clothes are raggedy. They will remind you that your hair is not straight or that your hair is too curly. They will remind you that you are imperfect and you need to spend as much money as possible so that you can barely get to a perfected level. And you still will have an issue where you will need to get something fixed. They will remind you of that time and time again, but it is up to us to remember that the system is imperfect. And although we have flaws, if we choose to organize to help all colonized people and all poor people achieve a better outcome of life, then that by itself is our saving grace. We don't need whiter teeth. What we need is to have our land back. That's what we need, because that is going to help us live a longer life. Join an organization that is working for justice, increase your political education, and visit our website so you can help us raise money for African Liberation Day. Adase.
Madase, obrigada. Thank you very much, Shakura, Mamtarde, everybody. And I think what you have done is prepared us very appropriately for the topic at hand, this very important discussion about driving France out of Africa. And of course, we have to start that by talking about Ahmed Sékou Touré and the Democratic Party of Guinea, the PDG, because that's where a lot of what's happening today historically stems out of what happened in Guinea over 60 years ago. And so what happened is that France, like all of the European colonizers, like Shakur said, had a firm grip in the colonial sense on a number of territories. You know, you all should know by now, the Berlin Conference in 1884, these European countries who were already there exploiting and controlling Africa came to the table to agree about how they would collectively respect each other's right to control and exploit our homeland and our people. And that's what the Berlin Conference was. And so France came out of the Berlin Conference with a number of territories in Africa that they would continue to colonize in 1884. Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal, Guinea, Cameroons, Benin, they came out of the Berlin Conference with those areas that they controlled. And they established this concept called the French Union. And what that was is, on the surface, it was supposed to be all of these countries in the world, including the other countries outside of Africa that France colonized, like Haiti, for example. And all of these countries were supposed to be based on, this is France's logic, part of this French Union, meaning they were part of the French world. But really what that French Union meant is that these were the places that France controlled the political, economic, and social industry of all of these countries to benefit France at the expense of all of these countries. That's what it really meant. So as the African independence movement, which we would argue influenced every independence movement that African people have had everywhere else in the world, all throughout the Western Hemisphere, Europe, etc. When that movement started in the 1950s, one of the things that happened is that as momentum began to build after the independence of Ghana in 1957, it became clear to the European colonizers that their days of having domestic colonialism in Africa were numbered. And so what happened is that France raised the question, because of the demand from all of the French colonies in Africa, about whether these entities wanted to continue as a part of the French Union. And there was a referendum, which is basically a vote that was carried out by all of these countries. And every country in Africa voted at that time to remain a part of the French Union, except Guinea and the Democratic Party of Guinea, which was led by Ahmed Sékou Touré, who you see in the picture there, one of our ideologues in the APRP, with his wife, sister comrade Ande. Touré, who unfortunately just made her physical disappearance just a year or so ago. So what happened with the PDG in 1958 is, and we've talked about this a lot, is they said, hell no, France, we want, as Secretary said, we prefer freedom in poverty to servitude in riches. So they said no to the French Union. And France immediately, like within hours, punished Guinea relentlessly for this decision. And we've talked a lot about that. We won't go into it again. But the point is that France showed you how savage and brutal they were by how they treated Guinea for just simply saying, we want to control the destiny of our own lives. But what this did, despite that, and despite the challenges that Guinea had, and despite the challenges that the former colonies in Africa from all of the colonizers continue to have today, it did establish a strong note of dignity amongst the African masses that extended not only just in Guinea, but beyond Guinea to the other French former colonies, beyond the former French colonies to all of the colonies, beyond Africa to African people everywhere. We've had other workshops where we've talked about the impact of the PDG on the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We've talked about that here a number of times, and how SNCC had a tremendous, or I'm sorry, the PDG in Guinea had a tremendous role in influencing SNCC's militant turn in the mid to late 1960s, which fueled the Black Power movement in this country. And it's not a coincidence that the person most readily connected to the initially raising the Black Power phase, Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, as well as comrade brother Mukasa Dada, formerly Willie Ricks, became organizers within the APRP, and Kwame Ture himself moved to Guinea to become a leading militant in the Democratic Party of Guinea. So the point is that this act in 1958 reverberated throughout the African world with a clear message to the African masses. We will determine our own destiny, whether you like it or not. And as a result of that, you know, Guinea's courageous action at that time began to plant those seeds throughout all of Africa and throughout all of the African masses. Now, we have to talk about neocolonialism, which we've talked about a lot, but of course, the African countries got their nominal political independence, and then this concept of neocolonialism began to become dominant in Africa. What is neocolonialism? Well, neo means afterwards or the next phase. So the Europeans, based on the African independence movement, began to recognize that our days of being able to live in these African countries and control everything this way are coming to an end. So instead, what we have to do is create an apparatus where we can continue to control the mineral wealth in Africa, even though we are no longer physically there. So the way we do that is by training and creating a bourgeoisie, a petty bourgeoisie class throughout Africa who will be committed to maintaining our interests, even though we are no longer physically there. And so this happened all throughout Africa, not just in the former French colonies, but all over the African continent. And one of the examples of how that's manifested itself is that you hear a lot of talk today about France and Britain and all of these criminal thug nations continuing to exploit Africa and to charge Africa for colonizing Africa. And one concrete example of that is on your screen there, where, and this is happening right now, you all, in 2023, that France requires all of the countries in Africa who use the CFA franc as their currency. And there are a number of countries, including the country I just left, Guinea-Bissau, that do that, use the CFA franc as their currency. It requires all of these countries to invest 50% of their revenues into the Bank of France. So the Bank of France can benefit from investing that money. This is a crime against humanity, but we're talking about criminals. And that's what criminals do, is commit crimes against humanity. Because what this does is if you want to understand why Africa's poor in 2023, then it's these types of practices that will clearly demonstrate to you why this is so. France is one of the richest countries in the world and has been historically. There is no reason why they need African currency by demand invested in their national bank. This is simply a tactic to exploit Africa in a way that most of us today have no idea about, and there's no active organization that most of us are involved in to put a stop to this criminal activity. So, this is one of the many ways we can go on and on. Shakura mentioned like some of the tariffs that they impose on, they steal the resources from Africa. And in the case of Guinea, it would be bauxite, which you use to make everything aluminum, right? So they steal the resources from Africa, and then they charge all these outstanding tariff taxes when they're the ones stealing them in the first place. This is what the European colonizers, including the United Snakes of America, do to dominate Africa's political and economic reality. So this is why the system of colonialism and slavery that was enacted 530 plus years ago is stronger today than it was back in the 1400s when it started. And it continues to represent a system where, our people are consistently forced to adhere to the interests of the European colonizing masses. And so let's talk about what some of the latest responses to that are. And so you see the sign there in the picture in French, and again, rough translation is "the French army are criminals." Very, very accurate statement. Very accurate statement. Any colonizing force is a criminal force. They're the real criminals in the world. Don't talk to us about no Africans trying to protect waters out of Somalia being pirates. Don't come at us with that nonsense. Don't talk to us about the scam industry in Nigeria. We don't want to hear that nonsense because we know better. The real criminals are the thieves from Europe, the US, Canada, Zionist state of Israel, and all of these crooks and criminals are the real thugs on the planet Earth. Don't talk to us about no African with their pants sagging. We don't want to hear that nonsense. We're not stupid like you. We know that the people who control the world's resources do it through theft and murder, and that makes them the criminals. We are not going to buy into that bourgeoisie nonsense. So that's what the sign is talking about, that these people are criminals. They're robbing us blind. And so what does that mean? It means that thousands of French troops roamed in Africa up through 2022 under the guise that they're fighting terrorism, right? And this is for all of you people in the goon squad who think that Barack Obama was a great president and something that African people should be prideful about, when it was this coon who proliferated the African Command Program, where there are between 75 and 100 US military bases in Africa. Don't talk to me about that, because I've been all over the African continent. I've seen these bases. I've seen these Marines over there, these Green Berets. I've seen them. I know that the people there don't want them there because they are not doing anything to combat terrorism. And I'm not even talking about the fact that the only reason why there's a threat of so-called terrorism in Africa is because of imperialism. That's a separate seminar. But I'm talking about the fact that nothing is being done. They say they're there for Al-Shabaab and the Islamic State and Boko Haram. These are not entities that are posing significant and monumental dysfunction throughout Africa today. If you believe that, I feel sorry for you. It's just simply not true. And I'm not, we're not supporting terrorism. We're revolutionaries. And you know the difference between a terrorist act and organized revolution. I still feel sorry for you. But what we're saying is that these entities are not the primary problem in Africa. The primary problem in Africa today is the same problem it's always been. It's capitalism and imperialism. It's white supremacy. It's all of the things that come from capitalism and imperialism. And so they're there under this guise that they're fighting terrorism. You can't name one thing that they've done to make a single person in Africa safer since they've been there. AFRICOM's been in Africa now for almost 15 years. It started under the George W. Bush regime, but it, again, proliferated under Barack Obama. It was basically nothing under George Bush. It was proliferated, meaning the substantial amount of funding towards it, the substantial amount of personnel, training, weapons, all that stuff, that was your boy Barack Obama that did that. And so 15 years of this, and you can't name a single place that's safer from this alleged threat today because of anything the US military has done, and all the imperialists, the French military, the British military, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, all of these terrorist organizations, you can't name any way. I challenge you. You can't name any way they've made Africa any safer today, despite all that. And we know that the real reason why they're there has nothing to do with terrorism. It has everything to do with repressing the massive dissent that's rising among the African masses everywhere on the African continent. We tell you all the time, Africa is on fire, but you don't believe it because it's not on MSNBC, whatever the hell that is, a CNN or CIA. And if it's not on those capitalist entities, then it doesn't exist for most of us. So we don't believe that. But we're telling you, Africa is on fire. And these movements are rising up, demanding that these colonial forces get the hell out of Africa. What we're saying to you is that there are thousands of people in Burkina Faso, thousands of people in Mali, thousands of people in Guinea, thousands of people in Senegal, et cetera, and so forth, who are starting to rise up and say these colonizers have got to go. And you should see these movements as mass movements, movements coming up from the groundswell up among the African masses. That's why you're not going to see it on CIA network, because they're never going to educate you about a mass movement. But that's what's happening, you all. And that's how we should see these actions. And that's important to say because the governments in these countries I just named are military style regimes. And you cannot get revolution and democracy from a military style regime. The only way that can happen is if the military, the folks who stage a coup d'etat or whatever they do, are willing to relinquish power and ensure that there's an honest plebiscite or an honest referendum process where the masses of people can begin to step into that role and take power in the country. That has happened. It happened in Burkina Faso with Thomas Sankara. It happened in Libya with Muammar Gaddafi. But aside from that, these other military regimes have not demonstrated a willingness to do that. So we're not saying that these military regimes are waging an anti-colonial war against France. What we are saying is that the masses of people in these former French-controlled areas of Africa are rising up and creating a movement. And as a result of that, these military-style regimes are forced because Frederick Douglass told us power concedes nothing without a demand. And so because of the actions of these masses of Africans, these military style regimes are being forced to move in the direction that the masses want them to move. And so let's talk about what the people are exposing about these French military existences throughout Africa. Well, they're fighting against terrorism. No, what the masses are saying is, no, you're not doing that. What you're doing is serving as an armed force to repress our people and continue France's dominance in our national home. And also to repress, what we mean by repress is to repress legitimate discontent against imperialist occupation of Africa. What do we mean by that? Well, one of the things that we can say the French military has been very active in doing is engaging in covert operations from these areas where they exist. Like in Niger, for example, had thousands of French troops. And what those French troops were doing in Niger, this is in 2021, 2022. We're not talking about ancient history here. What these French troops were doing in Niger is they were engaging in military actions against the Tuareg rebels from Libya. Who are the Tuareg rebels in Libya? These are people, primarily black-skinned Africans, not all black-skinned Africans, but a whole lot of them in Libya from the Benoit region. If you studied it or you paid attention to the previous workshops we've done about Libya, we've done a number of them, then you know that that's the region where Gaddafi came from. It was the region in Africa that gave the most support to the Libyan Jamahiriya when it existed. And as a result, it's also the region in Libya that sustained the most repression from these reactionary pirates that have taken over with the backing of US imperialism since 2011 in Libya. And it's important to say that because a lot of us are confused. Well, it's Arabs don't like black people. I mean, if that's all you think is happening in Libya, I feel sorry for you. I mean, this is way more complex than that. This is a case of these rebels, for example, the Tuareg rebels are fighting to bring back the Libyan Jamahiriya in Libya. And if you remember what happened, because we have such short memories, the reason why US imperialism and your boy Barack Obama took the Libyan Jamahiriya out is because Libya was in the process of introducing the dinar, which would have been a national currency in Africa, to combat the European capitalist currencies that would be backed by Libyan gold bullion that they stole after they terrorized Libya in 2011. So these folks are saying, no, we're not giving up. We're going to come back and reclaim power. We're having we're building a revolutionary movement, and we want to reclaim power in Libya. Now, whether they're legitimately trying to do that, time will tell. But the point is, regardless of what the Tuaregs are, imperialism sees them as a threat to controlling interests in Africa. So they're engaging in these military operations against them, trying to use Niger as their base. And if you want to know, when those 4 US Green Berets were killed, that's what that was about. The people ambushed them because the people there in Niger don't want US imperialism sabotaging what happened in Libya. Because unlike most of us here in this backward cesspool country, the people in Niger aren't stupid. They know that Libya created the man-made lake and provided potable water for all of the Sahara Desert. They know that. They know the United States has not done a damn thing for Africa. We might be stupid and not know that here, but the people there are not confused. And so when they see US Green Berets in Africa, they know that's not a good thing. And that's why they ambushed them and killed them. And that was when Trump, I have trouble remembering, they're all the same to me, but I think it was when Trump was president. And that's why the sister who was married to the African Green Beret was trying to get information and she couldn't. It was all in the news. You have to remember, it was only a few short years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, why an African would be in the US military and in the Green Beret. That's another seminar topic, why that would happen. But the point for now is that the purpose of these criminal French troops in Africa is simply to carry out the imperialist agenda of domination of African resources, repressing any effort to challenge that status quo. That's what that's about. And so resistance against imperialism is widespread and growing all throughout Africa. And so what the masses of people are doing in these African countries are saying no more. We want them out. We want to be able to have our own dignity and self-determination. So some of the countries have initiated a pact. Burkina Faso, Mali have initiated this pact. They're trying to, negotiating. Other countries will probably most certainly join this pact. Niger, maybe Guinea, Senegal, maybe some of these other entities will join this. But the point here is that, again, we are not looking at just the present governments in Africa, the military-style governments, the neo-colonial governments, and saying, okay, this is what's happening from what they're doing. What we're trying to stress is that these efforts, the union that's being called for, the call to drive France out of Africa, are respective of the masses of people making a demand, and these people having to honor it and adhere to it, at least on some level, at least give some sort of message that, yes, we're listening and we're going to do that, because they don't want people to rise up and tear the countries apart. And all of this should be seen as a part of the resistance of the African masses against NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, against AFRICOM, the African Command, U.S. military bases all over Africa, and the whole concept of imperialism in Africa as a whole. That's what we have to remember, you all, that this is an anti-imperialist movement. That it doesn't require the masses to use the word imperialism for us to understand that that's what it is. That's exactly what it is. Because the masses of people in Africa, as we should, are getting sick and tired of having the world's largest supply of mineral resources and watching these European corporations come into Africa, steal those resources, convert them into the modern technology that all of us use every day, and while Africa gets nothing in return. People are sick and tired of that, and you should see these movements as a reflection of people saying, we are not going to live in the world like this any longer. And if you don't, if people don't recognize that, we are going to organize and take all of our stuff back. And you know what? That is exactly the work that we are engaged in, to ensure that all of that happens on an organized, systemic, and protracted level. And I'll just say one thing, because if you go on social media in this backward country, you see all of these Negroes and coons and buffoons talking about, I ain't connected to Africa. Well, first off, who the hell asked you? I mean, talking like that, I hope you never go east of New York City. Keep your dumb ass here. We don't want you in Africa. Please stay here with that nonsense. Please don't take that home to Africa. First off. Second off, you cannot convince me that all of this anti-Africa propaganda. I saw this video the other day where Isaiah Thomas, the ex-basketball player, was on there, taught they had some Negro history thing on TNT TV, which is a, capitalist TV station that broadcasts basketball games here. And he's on there, and Chris Webber, another former basketball player, was talking about history and, what was doing okay. I mean, what can you expect from these types of people? But Isaiah Thomas cuts him off and says, we are not all from Africa. I mean, what an asinine thing to say on national TV without any kind of content, nothing, just that statement. And so I make a comment about that, and all these people will, I mean, it's weird. So there's so much poison air blowing between our ears in this backward country. I mean, it's phenomenal. You know damn well you've never picked up a single book and read a sentence about Africa. So when Africa is mentioned, shut the hell up. Shut up. Some of us have dedicated our life to this. So you shut the hell up, okay? Because all you're doing is putting pollution into the atmosphere. And there will come a day when if you don't shut up, we'll have enough power to shut you up, because we are moving forward with this. Our people are speaking, taking whatever they can to make the message that we are no longer going to live like this. And if you don't pay attention to that, that's on you. That's on you. So now these agreements I mentioned are coming to existence. And now we see the masses rising up. And again, I mentioned what was happening in Niger, for example, and the masses rose up and had a mass demonstration against that, as you can see there in that picture. And the French military rose up and started firing weapons into the people in the city of Niamey, the capital city there in Niger, and killed 5 people. And all this did was make it so that the next day there were even more people out there. And this is going to continue, you all. And what will make it sustainable is we have to bring organization to it. It can't just be a spontaneous uprising, because spontaneous uprisings, the problem with that is people get hungry, they get tired, they got to earn money for their families, and then that's when it dies out. So we have to figure out how to get on the ground and develop capacity to sustain our resistance. So the takeaways from this is that the masses of people make history, you all. The people in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, all over the world, they want France gone from Africa. This is a mass statement. You shouldn't see this as just a reflection of a couple of governments in Africa. That's what imperialism wants you to see. This is a mass statement about the need for us to control our lives as African people all over the world. We rise up this way because the entire system of capitalism and imperialism is built and maintained on our backs. That's why African people protest in mass in Canada, protest in mass in Brazil, protest in mass in Germany, protest in mass in the United States of America, protest in mass all over the African continent. No other people you can say that about, because the capitalist imperialist system is not built and maintained on them the way it is on us. That is the reason why. It's not that we're any better, that we're any smarter, none of that. This is a class analysis that we make here when we make that statement. So this is important to understand it in that context. And also along with that, these are clear examples of how Africa is on fire, and this resistance to imperialism is going to continue to grow, because you got organizations like ours who are doing everything we can to throw oil on that fire. You know, we got people on the ground all over Africa. I don't give a damn if you don't know it. I've seen them, I've worked with them. So I don't need you to know it. If you don't know it, you can find out if you want to. But if you don't want to, they ain't got that. Well, then the hell with you. You know, we'll just walk over your chest when we get strong enough. We don't need you. You know, we're building. That's what we're doing. I've been in this party 39 years building. Nobody can say any different. And we'll continue to do that for as long as I have breath left in my body. And I'm just one of many. So we're building. We're doing our work. You just don't worry about us. Just make sure you're doing your work. But that's exactly what that means. And these protests and France's forced acceptance of the will of the people demonstrates that we are going to build a worldwide Pan-African forward progress, Pan-Africanist struggle that is rooted and based on the African continent. There is no question at all about that. And if you have any ability to analyze the world analytically, if nothing else, what's happening in these areas of Africa should tell you that, if nothing else. Now, we only have a few minutes every Sunday to do this show. We can't go, we'd love to go deeper, but our job is to spark something that helps people want to know more about these instances. And that's what we try to do. And the last thing we'll say is that all of this makes it clear that our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is the right pathway. I just read a book where, it's another one of these books where they're going into this absurd analysis about the life of Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael. And they, always talk like he lost his mind when he moved to Africa. And it's just so insane. But if you think about it from a logical and analytical standpoint, if somebody was seeking Black power in the United States of America, like he was, and you had engaged in on-the-ground work like the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which was without question a project for Black power, and then the Black Panther Party, which was without question a project for Black power. And from those efforts, leaving your skin on the ground from doing all that intense work, you realize it's very difficult for us to gain power in a system without overturning that system, because the very system is the force that keeps us oppressed. And then recognizing that the system is a worldwide system. So how can we overthrow it when we are just here in the United States? It would make sense to me, maybe not you, but it would make sense to me that you would have to expand your horizons and go beyond that and recognize, where is all this coming from? It's coming from the necessity to exploit Africa. That's where it's coming from. So that takes us to where we are today. So all of this makes sense. The only thing that we have to do is figure out how to link up what's going on in Niamey, Niger, to what's going on in Crenshaw District, LA, and in Brazil, in Honduras, in the Dominican Republic, in Hamburg, Germany. That's our work. That's what we have to figure out how to do. And we can do that just by engaging around these questions with folks. Now, I'm 60 years old, and I continue to do this work the way I've seen it to work. And what that means is we in the APRP, we don't spend time talking to people that agree with us already. We go out and try to find people that don't know anything about what we're talking about. So for example, yesterday, I spent all day on the university campus here, working with some young folks, orientating them into the work-study process of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. None of these people were even 20 years old yet. I'm 60 years old. If I was like most people my age, I would be like, I got to kick my feet up, drink a beer, and relax on Saturday. That's my day off. I don't have any days off. I'm trying to build revolution. I don't want any days off. I'll have days off when I'm dead. I'm inspired to do this work. And I'm not bragging. I'm just saying, this is what we have to do, you all. Each one teach one and bring people into an organized apparatus. The APRP is one of those organized apparatus. If you don't want to do it with the APRP, then do it in some other organized apparatus. If you don't see any organized apparatus that moves you, then start your own damn apparatus and call it, I'm glad that hour is up and I don't have to listen to his ass talk organization, and organize for justice under that organization. And even though you don't like us, we'll help you organize your organization, because we just want to see our people organized. We just want to see our people organized. And we know that what's happening in the former French colonies in Africa is a cry from our people that we want to be organized and we want to be free. And if we do anything for whatever time we have left on this earth, we are going to give everything we can to make sure that call is answered. So we thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you spending this hour with us. We ask you to join us next week. We're going to keep the fires lit. We're going to talk on March 5th about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's influence on the modern perspective against Zionism. And if you've paid any attention to us, we've talked about the role Zionism plays in oppressing the African masses as well as the Palestinian masses. So that's how we contextualize this concept. So join us next week for that program. Go to the Forward Ever shop of the APRP. To hell with just supporting Black businesses that just pocket the money you spend with them and do nothing to advance our struggle for liberation. Support liberation organizations. Don't just buy one thing. You don't go to McDonald's one time. You go there every damn day. So support our struggle as much as you can. Don't just buy one thing and say, well, I supported that. You know, that doesn't make any sense. You know, come on, tell people. Buy presents, use our site to buy presents for people. Yeah, there might be a backlog because we need more people to support our efforts, but do it anyway, because it's for the good of humanity. And go to aprp-intl.org, join the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. Do it today. Click on the link and join. And if you don't want to join us, like I said, join some other organization working for justice. Go to betterworld.me. All of these videos are housed there. Hood Communist, you can go there. We have articles there every Thursday. Check that out. Support one of our projects on the ground. Speaking of Burkina Faso, in Burkina Faso, one of our many projects we have throughout Africa, the Thomas Sankara Center for Liberation and Pan-African Unity. You can click the QR code there and support that work going on there. Support all of our programs that you see there at the bottom of the screen. There are a number of them. This is just one of them. They're all sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and they're all focused on giving us what we need to get free. And continue to buy my book, please. I use the proceeds to finance my work to build the APRP where I am, a guide for organizing defense against white supremacist, patriarchal, and fascist violence. It's only an $8 book. There are people in Europe and Africa buying the book, so you should get it too. You will not regret it. It's only 8 U.S. George slave-holding Washington dollars. You got it. You got it for all kind of other stuff. Use it to support liberation organizations. We thank you very much. Have a great rest of your Sunday evening. Forward ever, backwards never. Always stay clever. Africa will be free.